I was 35 when I met him. And for the first time, I thought I had found everything I had been searching for. True love. For 6 years we built a life together. One that felt like a dream. It wasn't perfect, but it was beautiful. He was kind, supportive, thoughtful, everything I had hoped for. People would look at us and say, "You two are lucky to have found each other," and I believed it. I thought I had something rare, something most people spent their whole lives searching for. At first, it was magic. We spent hours talking, laughing, sharing our hopes, our dreams. He was my best friend, my confidant, my partner in every sense of the word. Every day with him felt like an adventure, a chance to build something meaningful. We celebrated the milestones, moving in together, our first vacation, planning for the future. Everything seemed to fall into place, as if we were destined for each other. I was certain that this was it. This was the love I would hold on to for the rest of my life, and for a while, it felt that way. The life we created together felt like the kind of love that people wrote books about. We had our ups and downs, of course, but no relationship is without its struggles. What we had, I thought, was strong enough to weather any storm. Every argument, every disagreement, we would work through it, and come out even stronger. He would tell me things that made me feel like I was the one. He would say, "I've never known anyone like you. You make me want to be better," and for the longest time, I believed him. I believed in us. I thought that no matter what came our way, we could get through it. Together. When people looked at us, I saw the envy in their eyes. "You're so lucky," they would say. And I would smile, thinking, "Yes, I am." I felt secure. I felt loved. I thought we were perfect for each other. Two souls who found their way to one another in a world full of uncertainty. But love, I've come to understand, isn't always about the fairy tale. It's not always about the way things look on the outside, or how easy it seems. Sometimes, love is about what happens when the facade starts to crack, when the person you love starts slipping through your fingers. Sometimes, love is about how we handle the moments when things stop being easy. In those first 6 years, I had no reason to doubt. I was certain. I was happy. I thought I had found the person I was meant to spend the rest of my life with. But suddenly, everything changed. It didn't happen all at once. At first, I didn't see the shift. It was gradual, like the slow fading of a sunset. And maybe, in a way, I wanted to ignore it. I wanted to believe that love was enough, that it could overcome anything. I kept telling myself that no matter what happened, we would be okay. But deep down, I had started to feel the distance. I couldn't name it yet, but I could feel it. And that's when the dream of true love began to unravel, in ways I couldn't have predicted. It started with something small. At first, I didn't think much of it. Maybe it was just a phase. Maybe he was just stressed from work, or tired from the constant demands of everyday life. But as time passed, I couldn't ignore the way he was pulling away. He was still there, physically, but emotionally. He seemed miles away. It started with the long hours at work. He'd get up early and stay late, and when he came home, he'd be exhausted, barely able to hold a conversation. I told myself, it's just work. He's just dealing with pressure. He'd been promoted recently, and I saw how much it meant to him. I celebrated with him, cheered him on, and tried to be the supportive partner he needed. But slowly I noticed a shift in him. His eyes weren't as bright when he looked at me. His smile was more tired than genuine. The small moments of affection that we once shared, the hand-holding, the random kisses, the late-night talks, started to fade away. At first, I thought maybe it was me. Maybe I was imagining it. I tried to reassure myself that he was just going through a busy period, and that everything would be fine. But as the weeks passed, the emotional distance between us began to feel too heavy to ignore. He became more restless, more irritable. There were days when he barely looked at me, and when he did, his gaze felt distant. The warmth that once filled our home was slowly being replaced by something colder, something that felt like a slow and quiet unraveling. When we did talk, it was like we were speaking two different languages. I would try to ask him how he was feeling, what was going on in his mind, and he would shrug it off. "I'm fine," he'd say. But I could see the tension in his shoulders, the way he clenched his jaw, the way he avoided eye contact. He wasn't fine. I knew it, and deep down, I think he knew it too. but neither of us was ready to confront it. So we let the silence grow, a space between us that was too wide to bridge with just a few words, and then there was the drinking. At first, it was occasional, just a drink here and there after a long day, something to unwind, but it started happening more frequently. I didn't want to judge, didn't want to make a big deal out of it. He was stressed, I thought. He needed a way to cope, but the more he drank, the less he was present, the more he retreated into himself, drowning out his worries with alcohol, until he became a stranger in his own body. I tried to be patient, I tried to be understanding, offering my support, offering my love. I told myself that if I just gave him time, if I just kept showing up, kept being there for him, he'd find his way back. But the man I loved, the man I had known, who had been so warm, so connected, was slowly slipping away, and no matter how much I reached out, he kept pulling further away. I kept asking myself, what am I doing wrong? I kept wondering where the man I fell in love with had gone, and in the midst of it all, I realized something: my love wasn't enough anymore. It wasn't enough to fill the void that was growing between us. It wasn't enough to heal the distance that was now too wide to ignore. The distance between us grew without warning, but somehow, I saw it coming. It wasn't as if one moment we were close, and the next we weren't. It was a gradual thing, the kind of shift that happens so slowly, so quietly, that you wonder how you didn't notice it before. I kept thinking, if I just tried harder, if I just loved him more, I could pull him back from the edge. But the truth was, he was already slipping further away, and nothing I did seemed to make a difference. We went through the motions, living together, sharing a space, but the intimacy was gone. The small touches, the quiet conversations, the unspoken connection that once held us together, had vanished. Instead, we sat side by side, like two strangers living under the same roof. I would try to talk to him, to reach out, but the silence between us was deafening. His responses were short, distracted, and when he did look at me, it was like he was looking through me, not at me. I started to wonder if I was invisible to him. I would spend hours planning little surprises for him, hoping to rekindle something, but the excitement wasn't there. His face would remain neutral, his eyes tired. It was as if he was going through the motions of being present, but not actually there. I tried to convince myself it was just stress, that once things settled down at work, everything would return to normal. But deep down, I knew the truth. We weren't the same anymore. The nights grew longer. I'd lie in bed next to him, feeling his back turned toward me, knowing he was awake, but not reaching for me. I would close my eyes, and try to hold on to the memory of the way things used to be, but the harder I held on, the more it seemed like he was slipping further away. I wanted to scream, to demand that he talk to me, to tell me what was going on, but every time I opened my mouth, I saw the exhaustion in his eyes, and I didn't have the strength to push him further away. He had already closed off so much, and I didn't want to be the one to break him completely, so I stayed quiet. I kept pretending everything was okay. I kept telling myself that it was just a rough patch, that this was just temporary. But it wasn't temporary, it was becoming our reality. One evening, I asked him how he was feeling, if there was anything on his mind. He just shrugged, and muttered, "I'm fine." But I knew he wasn't. I knew that something inside him was broken, but I couldn't fix it. He had already built walls around himself that I couldn't tear down, no matter how much I tried. I began to realize that this distance wasn't just about his job, his stress, or his struggles. This distance was something deeper. It was about him, about how he had checked out emotionally, about how he had already started to let go, even before I had noticed. The hardest part was knowing that, even though I still loved him, I was becoming a stranger to him too. The more I tried to connect, the more he pulled away. The more I gave, the less he was willing to give in return. And all I could do was watch as the man I loved slowly faded into someone I didn't recognize. The change in him became harder to ignore when the drinking started. At first it seemed like a simple way to unwind after a tough day. A drink here and there, nothing that seemed out of the ordinary. But soon I realized it wasn't just a drink, it was an escape, and not just a casual one. It became a habit, a crutch, a way to drown out the pressure, the sadness, and perhaps the guilt. He wasn't the man I fell in love with anymore. He wasn't the thoughtful, patient partner who had once showered me with affection. Now he was distant and cold, retreating into a bottle every chance he got. I would find him sitting alone in the dark, nursing his drink, his eyes glazed over, as if he was trying to forget everything. And for the first time, I realized something I hadn't fully understood before. He wasn't just avoiding me, he was avoiding himself. The more he drank, the more disconnected he became. The man who used to be present, who used to share his thoughts with me, was slipping further and further into himself. It was like I was watching him disappear in slow motion, and I couldn't do anything to stop it. His laughter became hollow, his words slurred, and the tender moments we once shared seemed to vanish into thin air. I tried to reach him, I tried to hold him, to talk to him, to offer him comfort, but it was like he couldn't see me anymore. His eyes were empty, distant, as though I had become a ghost in his life. I knew he was struggling with work, with the pressures of his new role, but I couldn't help him if he wouldn't let me in. His desire for validation from everyone else, his boss, his co-workers, strangers, was consuming him. I had been giving him my love, my support, my patience, but suddenly, none of it seemed enough. It wasn't just the drinking. It was the way he shut me out, the way he stopped trusting me with his emotions, the way he became someone I couldn't talk to anymore. I would ask him how he was feeling, and his response was always the same. "I'm fine." And every time he said it, I knew it wasn't true. I knew he wasn't fine, he was breaking, and I was watching him slip away, unable to do anything to stop it. The worst part wasn't the drinking, it wasn't the emotional distance that had crept in, it wasn't even the feeling that I was losing him. The worst part was that I couldn't fix him, I couldn't save him from himself. I had spent so much time trying to be the one who held everything together, trying to be the person who understood, the person who could make everything okay. But no matter how much love I gave, no matter how much patience I showed, it wasn't enough. He didn't want to be fixed. He didn't want to face his own demons, he just wanted to escape. And I was left behind, standing in the wreckage of what we once had, watching him drown in his own pain, knowing that no matter how much I loved him, I couldn't save him. The hardest part of loving someone with such deep wounds is realizing that, sometimes, they don't want to be healed. And that's when I knew I had to stop trying to save him, because I had been drowning too. The moment I found out about the affair, everything shifted. One word, one revelation, and the world I had so carefully built crumbled in an instant. I had suspected something for a while. The little signs, his avoidance, his late nights, the secrecy that felt like an iron curtain between us. But I never wanted to believe it. I never wanted to admit that the man I had loved, the man I had trusted with my heart, could betray me in the most profound way. It came out slowly, as most things do when you start digging for the truth. He wasn't home that night, and I found his phone on the counter. It was just a glance, just a quick look, but the moment I saw the name in his messages, I felt my heart stop. There it was, the confirmation, the woman he had been seeing, the one I had never heard about, the one who had taken up space in his life, in his thoughts, in his heart. While I was left here, still thinking we were fighting the same fight, I could hardly breathe. I picked up the phone, my hands shaking, my stomach churning as I scrolled through the messages. The intimacy in the words they shared hit me like a physical blow. It wasn't just the betrayal of his body, it was the betrayal of his soul. He had shared something with her that he had never shared with me, a part of himself I had fought so hard to connect with, only to realize it had already been given away. I was numb. I wanted to scream, to cry, to break something, but instead I stood there, frozen, paralyzed by the weight of it all. How could he do this to me? How could he betray the love we had built, the life we had shared? I had given him everything, my trust, my heart, my patience. And this was what he did with it. He tossed it aside for something new, for someone else. When he came home, I didn't confront him immediately. I couldn't. My voice was gone. All I could do was sit there staring at the phone in my hand, the evidence of his betrayal, the proof that my love had been insufficient, that my presence had not been enough to keep him from drifting away. I wasn't angry at first. I was just hurt, deeply, irreparably hurt. When I finally spoke, it wasn't with anger, it wasn't with blame. I asked him, why? And his answer, the one I will never forget, was, I needed something more. I needed to feel seen. Those words haunted me. All this time, I had been right here, loving him, supporting him, seeing him for who he was, but apparently it wasn't enough. I had given everything I had, and still it wasn't enough. The hardest part wasn't the betrayal itself. It wasn't even the heartbreak of knowing he had chosen someone else. It was the realization that no matter how much I loved him, no matter how much I had given, I couldn't fix this. I couldn't make him see me, love me, the way I needed him to. He had already made his choice. And it wasn't me. I stayed at first. I stayed because I wanted to understand. I wanted to believe that this could somehow be fixed. That maybe this was just a mistake, just a moment of weakness. But deep down, I knew that his betrayal wasn't just a single act. It was the result of something much deeper. Something I couldn't fix, no matter how hard I tried. And the more I stayed, the more I questioned myself. Why had I let him hurt me like this? Why had I kept putting his needs before mine? Why had I stayed so long, allowing myself to be ignored, to be taken for granted, to be treated like I wasn't enough? The pain of betrayal wasn't just about the loss of him, it was about realizing how much of myself I had lost in the process. The hardest question I had to ask myself after the betrayal wasn't whether or not I still loved him. I knew the answer to that. I loved him with everything I had. The hardest question was whether or not I could love myself enough to walk away. The first days after finding out were a blur. I could hardly sleep, my mind running through the same thoughts over and over. What was I supposed to do now? How was I supposed to fix this? How could I move forward from this hurt, this betrayal that had cut deeper than I ever imagined? I spent hours in silence, just staring at the walls, waiting for the right answer to come to me. But the truth is, I didn't know what the right answer was. I wanted to leave. I knew I deserved better, that I deserved someone who wouldn't betray my trust. But I also wanted to stay. I wanted to believe that what we had was worth fighting for, that the love we once shared could somehow be salvaged. Every time I thought I was ready to walk away, the memories would flood in. I would remember the man I fell in love with, the kind, thoughtful, loving person who had been everything I wanted. I would remember the moments of joy, the laughter, the promises of forever. It was so hard to let go of those memories, so hard to admit that he was no longer the man I thought he was, the man I had trusted. But deep down, I knew something I didn't want to admit. He wasn't the same person anymore. The man who had cheated on me, the man who had walked away emotionally and physically, wasn't the man I had loved. He was someone broken, someone who had made choices that had nothing to do with me. His betrayal wasn't a reflection of my worth. It was a reflection of his own unresolved pain and insecurities. And yet the emotional pull to stay was still there. It was stronger than I wanted to admit. There was a part of me that wanted to believe in him, to believe that with time he would come back to the person I knew, that we could fix it together. It was the part of me that clung to the idea of love as a fixer, that if I just loved him enough, things could go back to how they were. But I knew deep inside that love wasn't enough anymore. No matter how much I loved him, no matter how much I tried to understand, I couldn't keep sacrificing myself for someone who wasn't ready to meet me halfway. I couldn't keep losing pieces of myself, in the hope that one day he would realize my worth. I had spent so long fighting for him, fighting for us, and yet he had already given up. I wasn't ready to leave yet, but I was starting to realize that the hardest thing to do wasn't leaving him, it was leaving myself behind. I had been so wrapped up in his world, in trying to fix his pain, in trying to be everything he needed, that I had lost sight of who I was. And in order to save myself, I had to choose me. I had to stop looking for the answers outside of myself, and start looking within. The decision wasn't clear yet. I still didn't know if I was strong enough to walk away, but the question had shifted. It wasn't about whether I could forgive him. It was about whether I could forgive myself for staying too long, for allowing myself to be hurt over and over again, for allowing him to make me feel like I wasn't enough. And slowly I started to understand that the answer wasn't in staying or leaving. The answer was in how I chose to move forward, whether I stayed or left. It was about finding my own strength again, about remembering who I was, about choosing me no matter what. It wasn't a sudden realization, but one that had been building inside me for weeks, maybe months. It came quietly, in the stillness of a moment when I wasn't looking for it. I was sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at the life we had built together, now reduced to memories. The weight of everything that had happened, the betrayal, the confusion, the heartbreak, hung in the air like an invisible fog. But beneath it, something shifted inside me. For the first time, I asked myself a question I had never asked before. What about me? It was so simple, yet it hit me like a wave. I had spent so much time trying to understand him, trying to heal what was broken in our relationship, that I had forgotten to ask myself what I truly needed. I had been so focused on fixing everything around me, on trying to make him see me, love me, that I had lost sight of myself. I had been putting his needs, his emotional baggage, his problems before my own, believing that love meant self-sacrifice, that it meant giving and giving until there was nothing left of me. But in that quiet moment, as I sat there, alone with my thoughts, I realized something that changed everything. I deserved more. I deserved to feel seen, to feel valued, to feel loved, and not just by him, but by myself. I had been waiting for him to give me the validation I craved, to make me feel whole again, but the truth was, I needed to learn how to do that for myself first. I had been relying on him to fill the void inside me, but the void was never his to fill, it was mine, and I needed to take responsibility for my own happiness. Loving myself didn't mean being selfish. It didn't mean walking away from love or from him, if that was the right choice. It meant understanding that my worth was not tied to his actions or his choices. My worth was inherent, something that came from within, and it was something I had ignored for far too long. I started to let go of the guilt that I wasn't enough, that I wasn't doing enough, that somehow his betrayal was my fault. I stopped blaming myself for his choices, for his pain, for his decisions. I realized that no matter how much I loved him, no matter how much I tried to fix things, his actions were not a reflection of my worth. They were a reflection of his own brokenness, his own inability to heal. And while that hurt, it also gave me freedom. In that moment, I promised myself that I would no longer be the one to carry the weight of our relationship on my own. I would no longer be the one to keep giving, to keep sacrificing, to keep hoping that one day he would finally see me. I would stop waiting for someone else to make me feel worthy, and I would start seeing my own worth, on my own terms. I would learn to love myself first, to honor my needs, to protect my heart. I didn't know what the future held, whether he and I would ever find our way back to each other, or whether I would walk away for good, but I knew one thing for sure. I was no longer going to lose myself in someone else's story. I was going to write my own, and in that moment, I felt a shift, a small quiet moment of peace. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was enough. I felt like I mattered, not because of what I had given, not because of who I was to him, but simply because of who I was. That was the moment I began to heal. That was the moment I started to love myself again. Letting go wasn't easy. In fact, it was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do. But as the days turned into weeks, and the pain of betrayal began to settle into a deep, quiet ache, something inside me shifted. I started to realize that the love I had been holding on to, the hope that things could go back to the way they were, that we could fix what was broken, was no longer serving me. I wasn't letting go because I stopped loving him. I was letting go because I finally realized I had to start loving myself. For so long, I had stayed in this relationship, fighting for him, for us, believing that if I just gave more, tried harder, loved deeper, things would get better. But no matter how much I gave, no matter how much I sacrificed, I couldn't fix something that wasn't mine to fix. The more I held on, the more I lost myself. And in the end, I realized that holding on wasn't about love, it was about fear. I was afraid of being alone. I was afraid of what life would look like without him. I was afraid of the pain that came with the realization that the love I had invested so much in had been one-sided. But as I stood there, facing the choice between staying or walking away, I knew that I had to choose myself. I had to choose my own healing, my own peace, and my own future, because I couldn't keep giving to someone who wasn't willing to give back. I couldn't keep losing pieces of myself in a relationship that wasn't healthy anymore. The decision wasn't immediate. It wasn't as simple as packing up and walking out the door. It was a slow process of understanding that I had to let go, not just of him, but of the version of myself that had been holding on to this dream of love that no longer existed. I had to let go of the guilt, the shame, and the self-blame. I had to stop questioning whether I had done enough, loved enough, or given enough, because in the end, it wasn't about how much I had given, it was about how much I was willing to give to myself. And so I walked away, not in anger, but in quiet acceptance. I walked away because I knew that staying wasn't a choice that would lead to my growth. I walked away because I had spent so long losing myself in someone else's story, that I had forgotten my own. and walking away was the first step in reclaiming that story. The hardest part wasn't the actual act of leaving. The hardest part was accepting that it wasn't a failure. It wasn't a sign that I was weak, or that I had given up. It was an act of self-love. It was a decision to prioritize my own well-being over the emotional comfort of holding on to something that no longer served me. It was a decision to stop sacrificing myself for someone who wasn't willing to meet me halfway. In the weeks that followed, I cried. I grieved for the love we lost, for the man I thought I knew, for the future I thought we would have. But I also began to heal. Slowly I started to remember who I was before I got lost in the relationship. I started to find pieces of myself that had been buried under years of self-doubt, guilt, and emotional labor. And for the first time in a long time, I felt free. Walking away wasn't easy, but in that decision I found my strength. In letting go, I discovered a love for myself that I had never known before. And in that love, I began to rebuild, not just the life I thought I had lost, but a life that was truly mine. The silence that followed his departure was deafening at first. It wasn't the absence of sound, but the absence of him, of the life we had shared together, of the routines that had once filled my days. There were moments when the emptiness in the house seemed to swallow me whole, and I found myself longing for the noise, for the comfort of the familiar. But as the days turned into weeks, I began to realize that this silence wasn't something to fear. It wasn't something that marked the end of my life. It was the beginning of something new. For the first time in a long time, I was alone with myself. And at first, that was terrifying. I had spent so many years defining myself in relation to him, to the relationship, that I didn't know who I was without it. I didn't know who I was without him. The reflection I saw in the mirror felt unfamiliar, like someone I didn't recognize. But slowly, something began to change. Slowly, I started to see the woman in the mirror for who she truly was, not the version of herself that had been shaped by love and loss, but the version who existed long before I gave pieces of myself away. I started to realize that I wasn't really alone. Yes, the house was empty, and yes, I missed him, but I wasn't empty. I was filled with something I had forgotten myself. I began to spend time doing the things that brought me joy, things that I had pushed aside over the years. I took up painting again, something I had loved doing when I was younger but had abandoned in the chaos of life. I spent evenings reading, losing myself in stories that didn't require me to fix anything, stories that just existed for the joy of being told. I took long walks by myself, breathing in the fresh air, and allowing my thoughts to wander, without the weight of someone else's expectations hanging over me. And slowly, as I spent time in solitude, I began to feel stronger. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the pressure to be anything for anyone. I didn't have to fix someone else, to take care of their emotions, to silence my own needs in order to keep the peace. I could just be. And in those quiet moments, I learned that I was enough, just as I was. I didn't need anyone else to complete me. I didn't need anyone else to define my worth. My worth had always been mine to claim, and in solitude, I found the strength to finally accept that. Solitude didn't make me weaker, it made me stronger. It gave me the space to heal, to rediscover my passions, and to listen to the parts of myself I had long ignored. I wasn't broken because he had left.